I am just barely old enough to remember when the thought that games could one day compare to cinema was the stuff of fantasy, and I'd wager many still mistake that to be true, not having seen the likes of, say, Red Dead Redemption 2 or The Phantom Pain. On the flip side, I have a handful of friends who chuckle when they see these earlier games because they didn't grow up with them, and in 2019, they look so primitive and minimalistic. It's not really hard to see why. But stop and think about this for a minute. Art featured a one-way format for 40,000 plus years. The artist or creator makes something and the audience observes it. That was the way of all consumed media prior to the 20th century. So it was quite an advent when the earliest video games began to animate even the vague likeness of a character in real time per the input of the audience. Suddenly, media could host an exchange between the audience and the work, like a call and response. The user presses right and the protagonist moves accordingly. You might think, yeah, no shit, you just described video games, but it's actually a pretty novel concept in the grand scheme of things. And since for many years the technology wasn't ready to compete with cinema, game developers were poised to explore the merits that are unique to interactive media. The user might be in charge of navigation, character casting, plot direction via decision making, dialogue, ability management, in some cases even set design. All of these things, for the first time in the history of fiction, were at the disposal of the audience, who were no longer just viewers, but participants in their fiction. It is in this midst that my personal favorite sector of games emerged. It's what you might call the Western RPG. Fallout, Morrowind, Daggerfall, Ultima, Baldur's Gate, Oblivion. These are the games that say to the player, alright, who are you gonna be? What will you do? Where will you go? What enemies will you make? And what will the fate of this world be? At their best, these games let the player answer all of these questions, wielding bottomless permutations of results. So much can be at the mercy of the player's imagination, upon which these games thrive. With a good Western RPG, you can just keep saying, let's run the scenario again. Maybe I'll do a Hercules run, or Perseus. Why not Hades? Maybe a power-hungry cutthroat, or a peacemaking monk. What would Clint Eastwood do? Or fucking Whoopi Goldberg? How about the village idiot whose primary goal is to hoard cheese wheels? What would he do? You can run the experiment again and again to no end with a new story every time when these elements are handled correctly. It took broader audiences a good 20 to 30 years to realize the appeal of quote-unquote Western RPGs, a dose of which many first got in Skyrim. But cosmically speaking, games were only around for the blink of an eye before they became capable of competing with and occasionally outperforming cinema at its own craft, something we're starting to see now. This is generally thought to be a good thing and is even sometimes touted as a selling point.
I've been playing Uncharted 2 Among Thieves, but my girlfriend won't stop watching because she thinks it's a movie.
Yeah, I'm gonna file this under not an issue.
Uncharted 2 Among Thieves.
The thing is, barring extreme exceptions, movies follow the only structure they can. Now, there are many kinds of games with different prospects, merits, and structures. It's not inherently bad that a game would mimic the linear structure of a movie. Not everything has to strive to be as complex as possible, but it is frustrating when these movie-structured games are called the new benchmarks of the industry, because that inclines other developers to follow in those footsteps. The simple fact is that cinema-inspired form is not good for all games, and in some cases it's antithetical to the unique prospects of the gaming medium, particularly when we trend toward the extinction of those factors that make games unique, until all that's left is story. The way I see it, when all of the overwhelming praise goes to these wannabe movie games, other developers feel like they've wasted their time passionately slaving over these meticulously adaptive structures that go underappreciated or even unnoticed. They cynically arrive at a state of why bother? We've reached a point where the lines between genres have been blurred, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. But a lot of classic RPG devs are looking at cinema quality games from Rockstar and Naughty Dog, and they're saying, I want some of that. And what follows is an identity crisis throughout the core RPG genre. Nowadays, people debate to no end what RPG even means. Some people say Skyrim is not an RPG. Some say Red Dead Redemption 2 is an RPG. Is anything with perk trees an RPG? Is this an RPG? Or this? Why not this?
But Jambo, RPG stands for role-playing game, so it's literally any game where you play a role.
Right, okay, and pedophile is any person who loves children. So if you love children, you must be a pedophile.
Why don't you take a seat right over there?
Doesn't fucking work that way. Not everything in the lexicon is so straightforward. The debate itself is futile, and it's important to remember that RPG status doesn't make a game inherently superior, but we need some term to distinguish these games from whatever else. Call them old-style RPGs, or hippity-dippity RPGs. I don't care, just fucking pick something. Not so we can gatekeep, but for the utility of discussion. Make up your mind. Because as cinematic form takes the front seat, all the hallmarks of what we used to call RPGs get shoved into the back. Skills and or stats are sometimes altogether scrapped, narrative paths are simplified, and character creation is throttled by predetermined backgrounds or, my personal nightmare, a preset voiced protagonist with ambiguously labeled dialogue options. Let me tell you a story. The year is 2008 or so. I'm hanging out with my buddy who has this game Mass Effect. Now, I love a good character creator, so I'm like, cool, what's this game all about? I boot up the game and decide to model my character after Samuel L. Jackson. So here's the character I wanted to make.
And you will know my name is the Lord when I lay my vengeance upon thee.
Here's the character I got.
You big stupid jellyfish.
Mass Effect was a new IP, so it can do whatever it wants. It didn't have a predecessor to live up to. But when I saw that one of my all-time favorite series was going the same way, I was pretty disheartened. You might not think that a preset voice would inhibit your character creator so dramatically, but having a preset voice is a bit like having a preset face. So much personality, character, and essence is derived from one speech. You can say the same thing 100 different ways from 100 distinct personalities, and it can feel different every time.
Fuck you, man.
Fuck you!
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 Fuck you.
Fuck you, Harold!
No voice works as a one-size-fits-all. Some things are best left to the player's imagination, even if that lessens a game's cinematic properties. Between the voiced protagonist, the dialogue wheel, predetermined background, motivation, spouse, and son named Sean, I hardly felt like my Fallout 4 character was my character. And all of those factors appear to serve the same purpose, and that is to resemble cinema, or at least other more cinematic games. Dialogue plays out more cinematically with a voice. The narrative is meant to be stronger thanks to a more personal motivation and plot like you'd see in a movie. They're not comfortable trusting the user's creativity to sort out those elements themselves upon creating a character. Now, before you think I'm on the hate train, I love this guy, and frankly, whatever he shits out now, I still have him to thank for the quintessential entries in my all-time favorite genre. But the trajectory towards cinematic aesthetics has led us to a point where RPGs, the likes of Morrowind, New Vegas, etc., are all but extinct. And it seems like every time someone brings up Obsidian, they're immediately used as a cudgel against Bethesda, which is frustrating, because despite that both have a history of exemplifying Western RPGs, they often have wildly different prospects in the way of world structure, scope, tone, and so on. I was skeptical about the Outer Worlds because I recently picked up Obsidian's other game, Pillars of Eternity, on Switch. Let me show you some gameplay. But having completed multiple Outer Worlds playthroughs, I have to hand it to them. The Outer Worlds represents Western RPG's return to form. This game is an RPG with RPG elements. Silent protagonist, character creator, robust stats, meaningful choices. No, really, meaningful choices. I know you've been hurt in the past. We've been lied to so many times, but it's true this time. I can promise that your playthrough will be tailored to your actions, no matter how extreme, lethal, psychopathic, altruistic, what have you. The game adapts dramatically to whatever you choose to do. The world structure is not quite as open as some of its predecessors, mainly because it spans separate planetary zones as opposed to one wide open map. But there's still plenty of open exploration and secret ways to jump around the world and quest structure. Your path is totally in your control. The Futurama-inspired lore is relentlessly charming. The moral crossroads are complex to a challenging extent. The world is vibrant and endearing. It's relatively concise next to a Bethesda RPG, but for a game that's ripe for several playthroughs, that feels oddly fitting. Of course, it pales graphically or technically next to games like Red Dead Redemption 2, but that's because it knows its strengths and it has its priorities straight. Now, I don't want Bethesda to mimic Obsidian any more than I want them to mimic Rockstar. I don't want Starfield or Elder Scrolls 6 to be Outer Worlds. But I do want them to be similarly self-aware. That is to say, Bethesda, please don't try to be something you're not. Take a hard look in the mirror, know your strengths, and do what you do best. Don't worry about what Naughty Dog is doing, or Rockstar, or CD Projekt Red. Be you. And please, I don't want my orc in Elder Scrolls 6 to sound like
You big stupid jellyfish.
Western RPGs thrive on the player's imagination, so don't leave that by the wayside. Thanks for listening, and if you enjoyed this content, please consider liking and subscribing. This is a new channel, so that goes a long way. See you next time.